Welcome to the Protagonist Pub. My name is Tammy, and this is where characters gather. So, Dave is working from home this morning, so I don't know how long it's going to take me to record this video because he's currently talking to his team, so we shall see. It was a good reading week. I had some trouble settling on a book this weekend, but once I did, the weekend just was perfection. So, on that good note, let's talk about all the books I DNF'd this week. And there were far too many. The first one I DNF'd this week was a library book. And that would be Among Thieves by M.J. Kuhn. This is the first book in the series. I accidentally checked out the second book in the series. Don't know what the series is called off the top of my head. So I got the first book. Started off great. There's some really good world building in the first 5 chapters. Unfortunately, that good world building was let down by the author. In those first 4 chapters that I read before I set the book aside, there was just unnecessary swearing. Didn't add to the story. It didn't work in context. And she's building this great fictional world with, different races, and it's not set, in a familiar Earth-like setting. And yet she couldn't come up with fake swear words to fit the world and the races. She had to use the F word. Yeah. So, despite good world building and interesting storytelling, I tapped out. Just don't need to read it. So the next one I DNF'd this weekend was A Small Way to a Long Way to a Small and Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. As you know, this was in my latest 2x2x2 video, which I will link down below. And I had high hopes for this one. This one almost won the face-off. And I was a good 20%, 25% in. So I was well past 50 pages. And this book was published in 2014. Was not expecting this. There was pronoun nonsense. That was enough. I was done. Doesn't matter how good the story was. If you call a character a male and then... So, that is now off the list. And the last book I DNF'd this week was Faking the Fall by Juliet Christianson. This is the 4th book in the Sweater Weather series. Didn't get overly far. It starts off, they're still in college, so strike number 1, younger. It just read way too young for me, and it, backed out. Turns out to be a fake celebrity romance dating relationship scenario, and the whole celebrity thing just doesn't work for me. I never been a huge fan, and as much as I love Jenny Proctor, the How to Kiss a Movie Star at the end of August just solidified that for me. So I am not going to be reading that one unless somebody tells me it is like the 3rd book in the series, which was fabulous, whose name I suddenly cannot recall. Can't Help Falling by Courtney Walsh, which I reviewed last week. I'm okay if I skip this one. So, and yes, Clue and Fireball are playing right next to Mommy. Hi Fireball. Hi, Fireball. So, What did I read this week? I read 5 books this week, one of which was an audio, one of which was a NetGalley, and I'm sorry. Yeah, 5 books this week. Okay, so let's do the audiobooks first. 2 of them were audiobooks. The first one was Clean Sweep by Ilona Andrews. This was an audio from the library. I listened to it while I was stitching. It is it's a sci-fi fantasy. It's not pure fantasy. It's not pure sci-fi. It is definitely a combination of the two. Our main character is, and I forget her name, I'm sorry, an innkeeper, and she lives in a small town in Texas. And the book opens, and there's the citizens of town are very upset because another dog in town has been killed, and the story starts from there. And this is a very lighthearted sci-fi fantasy. I wouldn't call it cozy, but it isn't epic in scope. It was easy to listen to while I was stitching and counting, and it wasn't heavy. And, if I can get the next book in the series from library, I'm not opposed to that. There is some language, there is some violence. It isn't graphic. It's a little gory, but it isn't what I would consider graphic. And it just read a little young for me, but there was decent world building, and it isn't, mages slinging spells or anything. It has a definite fantasy magic system that's a little different than everything else. So, it is possible that if I get the next one from the library, I'll read it because I could listen and stitch and not have to pause to, count squares to make sure I wasn't off or anything. So that was good. And the next book I listened to, I forgot I did this on audio, was The Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. And this was for my 2023 Protagonist Pub Reading Challenge. I needed to read an American classic, and I'm running out of time, so I picked this one up on audio from library. We all know the story of Ichabod Crane. It's a very short book. It's under 2 hours, which made it an easy listen while I was stitching and kind of fit the fall mood, So I was good with that. So those are the audiobooks for the week. Okay, so physical book I read this week, and that would be An Alchemy of Masques and Mirrors by Craddock. This did win the 2x2x2 challenge, and I'm not going to say too much about this. I'm going to give it its own review here this week. I loved this book. I love this book, and if you are looking for a hopeful fantasy, this is it. I'm not going to say too much. There will be a separate video. But yeah, I totally loved this book. So the next 2 books I read on my Kindle. So first up is A Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan. Did finish this book. Talked about it last week. I completely love this book. It is flintlock fantasy. It is the first in the Powder Mage trilogy. I need to pick up the other 2. My library does not have them. It ended on a massive cliffhanger. there was drama and politics and a unique magic system and old gods and religion and political corruption and what happens when gods return. And if you are looking for a fantasy book that has a little bit of everything, this is a little bit of everything. It's just over 500 pages. It was immersive and action packed and just had characters I truly liked. I know a lot of people don't like one of the main characters. I had absolutely no issue with him. I cannot wait to read books 2 and 3. I really, really cannot wait to read books 2 and 3. It was so good. And it's definitely reignited my, hey, I need to read fantasies itch. So I highly recommend Promised Blood. I haven't reviewed it yet on my blog. I will do so this week. As always, it is linked down below in my description. So, okay. The next book, and the last book I read last week, is The Juliet Code by Pepper Basham. Where do I start? This is the third book in the Freddie and Grace series. I will put the release date right here. This was my NetGalley read. I loved this book so much. I put an Instagram post out and said there are 2 quotes, one in chapter 4 and one in chapter 5, that are just the epitome of love. And when I finished it late yesterday evening, I sent Pepper a message on Instagram, and I told her just how much I loved this book. I absolutely love this book. So I read The Mistletoe Countess just before I started YouTube, December of 2022. And I'm pretty sure it was my reintroduction to Christian fiction. I loved that book. It was romantic. It was sweet. It had just the right amount of gentle faith. It was funny. I loved the whole thing. And this year I read The Cairo Curse. I know at least The Cairo Curse is on my blog. So as always, it's linked down below. I love The Cairo Curse. The Egypt setting wasn't really working for me, but I still love the interaction of Freddie and Grace. I love the faith. I love the side characters. I love the fact that they adopted the orphan that the book opens up with. Everything about that book was great. Books 1 and 2 of the Freddie and Grace series are kind of like this delicious little tidbit of joy that is the Juliet Code. So, Freddie and Grace have left Egypt. They are now in Venice. They're still on their honeymoon. And the book opens, and Grace has her handbag stolen while on a gondola, chase ensues, she loses her hat. It's just your typical opening Freddie and Grace scene, to be honest. And it was great. It was fun. It was, a chase theme through Venice. And they run into an old friend, Detective Jack Miracle, and they get pulled into a painting mystery in Venice. That's the opening premise of the book. No spoilers. And then you hit chapter 4, and the quote occurs towards the end of chapter 4. So here's the chapter 4 quote. It's so important that I wrote it down in my planner. This is Freddie, his internal monologue. Grace has just learned that he used to paint as a child, and he hasn't done it because his brother ridiculed him and his parents weren't supportive, and so he's talking to himself after Grace's telling him, he should pick it back up. And Freddie says to himself, somehow she seemed to have insurmountable faith in him. Insurmountable faith in him. That is what love is. It's insurmountable faith in your spouse. That is love. No matter what, I have insurmountable faith in Dave. He can do anything because I have faith in him. And then in chapter 5, Freddie is talking to Grace. She's having nightmares about what happened in Egypt and her almost dying, and she's afraid that Freddie is going to, end up with a mad woman, and what will happen to her. And he says to her, Grace, wise men recognize the treasures they already possess and do not go in search of more. What else do I need to say? Those 2 quotes, chapter 4, chapter 5, those 2 quotes are Freddie and Grace. Those 2 quotes are the epitome of what it means to love someone. Insurmountable faith. Wise men don't go in search of more. I loved the story in this book. I loved the mystery. I loved the twist. I loved the side characters. I loved the faith. I loved the humor and the tenderness. This was by far my favorite Freddie and Grace book. I so hope she continues the series. I so hope there is a 4th book. This was uplifting and humorous, a great story, and just a very good example of love. That's the best I can say. God's love for us, our love for God, our love for our spouses, our ability to make one another better in a marriage. Thank you, Pepper. Just from the bottom of my old little heart, thank you. I loved this book. And yes, it was my NetGalley book for the week, and I appreciate NetGalley, giving me a copy of the book for my honest review and opinion. And there you have it. I truly loved this book. So that is what I read last week. So now we're at the what am I going to read part of them. I'm undoubtedly going to pick up the next book in the Sweater Weather series. I can't remember what it is called. I will put a picture of it right here. Comes out on Thursday. And then I have a little stack over here. It's not so little. I have started A Letter from Briarton Park by Sarah Elad. This has my attention. There's a mystery. There's a twist. I'm not very far, so I'm undoubtedly going to read that this week. I did pick this up at the library last week. That is the Hopkins manuscript by R.C. Sheriff. This was written in 1939. It is speculative science fiction. I do not read a lot of speculative science fiction. I am more of a character-driven science fiction type of person. Well, character-driven reader in general. However, I am 70 odd pages in, 75 pages in. And this is amazing. So the premise is it is the diary of one man as he awaits the moon potentially crashing into the earth, and what will happen. It is. If I didn't tell you it had been published in 1939, you would think it had been written recently. It is surprising. I'm very much enjoying it. So that brings us to the rest of the stack. So Texas by James Michener is for my 2023 personal reading challenge, and it was to finish the longest book on my shelves, my TBR, and it's undoubtedly Texas. It is 1,429 pages. I have currently read that much. I have that much to go. So what I did is there are 12 sections in the book. I've broken up the book. There's 3 months left in the year. So I have to read 4 sections every month. Or no. Yeah. So at the end of September, I need to be, I have like 120 pages to go. So I have to read it this week. And that will bring me to section 4. So I need to read 4, 5, and 6 in October. And then November, I need to read 7, 8, and 9. December, I need to read 10, 11, and 12. So those are good chunks. But, they're good chunks broken up. And as long as I break it up into chunks, we're okay. So I will read the remainder of that, 120 pages this week. It's probably the first thing I'm going to do this week so I can knock it out. The audiobook, unfortunately, is no longer available from my library, but the audiobook is like 62 hours. So it wouldn't take me about as long to listen to the audiobook as to physically read it. So I'm just going to physically read it. So that leaves some room for palate cleansers, and those would be library books. One would be The Anatomist's Wife by Annalee Huber. This was in my Victober adjacent cozy mystery recommendation video, which I will link down below. I keep wanting to read this book. I keep checking it out. It keeps getting shuttled aside. So I'm definitely going to try to get this worked in this week. We shall see. And then also a June of Ordinary Murders by Connor Brady. Also in the same video. This one, my brain keeps saying, please read, please read, please read. So, time to indulge my brain. So, that is what I'm planning to read for this week. I'm planning to stitch. Hopefully, we get the rain we're supposed to get. Because, oh my stars, is it humid outside right now? And hot. If you're living someplace where it isn't still, triple digits and humid, I am envious. I won't be envious when you have snow and I do not, but I am currently envious right now. Does not feel like fall here. So that is what I read. That is what I'm planning to read. What did you read last week? Did you read anything excellent? Leave a comment down below, like and subscribe, and I will see you here next time at the Protagonist Pub.